Welcome back to another GTN Coaches Corner, where we answer your triathlon training and racing related questions. This week, we're going to be chatting about, or answering the question, why my stomach is in bits after a hard training day.
Yeah, also, in 80-20 training, what counts as 80 and what counts as 20?
Do you need expensive electrolyte tablets?
How do I get back on program after an illness?
And how do I know if I'm ready for a 70.3? Right, good questions. Keep them coming in using the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner on this video, or any video for that matter, and we will answer them.
Right, to your questions. Kelly Frey asks, this was in reference to a previous Coaches Corner where we spoke about nutrition issues during a race. So can this also lead into the day after hard sessions and tummy issues? This was me this past weekend, 4-hour long session, brick, and then the next day I couldn't stomach anything. We discussed stomach issues during a race, during an Ironman, and people really struggling with that towards the back half of an Ironman. And Kelly's wondering whether this is normal post-training. The answer is yes. It is quite normal, actually, after a long, hard session, for a variety of reasons. We said that the reason that the previous asker was having problems was because they were overeating during the Ironman, getting to that point towards the end of the run where they've been overeating by like 20% all day, and it just gets to the point their stomach can't handle it anymore. A similar thing can happen in training where you're eating a bunch of stuff that you don't actually need. You feel like you need to, eating a whole bunch of gels, etc. And that's just kind of accumulating in your stomach. And of course, training fuels and race fuels don't have much fiber in them, for a good reason, because you don't want too much fiber on race day. You don't want to have those issues on race day. But the long-term effects of that is that the following day you may find that things are not working as they should, and you are kind of blocked up and struggling a little bit.
Or not blocked up, as the case may be.
As the case may be, yeah. So that is quite normal. The other thing that you do need to be mindful of post-long hard sessions is dehydration. And dehydration, obviously, it causes systemic problems, but it can seriously cause problems in your GI tract. You do need to make sure you get back on top of your hydration if you have let yourself get a little bit dehydrated during a long, hard brick session.
Yeah, another thing to bear in mind is some foods that may be fine on a normal day-to-day basis may just simply not actually work for you during exercise, and particularly during intense, after a hard training day. So it's worth playing around with that. Also, not just necessarily what you're taking on during the exercise, also around that. It may actually be impacting what is happening in your body as you've got less blood flow to your stomach during the actual exercise, being able to digest and sort of utilize that. So worth playing around with, having a think about what you are taking in on a day-to-day basis when you're training and figuring out what works best for you.
Yeah. Hopefully you won't be crippled for a whole weekend after every long session.
All right, next one from Tesfan Kinks, 9129. It's very hard when it's all one word.
Yeah.
Where do I break? But anyway. Hi GTN, when following a 2080 training plan and you run 3 times a week, is the tempo run considered a part of the 20 or the 80? I feel like you have to do a tempo run every week, but then there's no space for faster speed work. Okay. This is interesting. The 80-20 training, or 20-80 as you said here, it's kind of a bit of a buzzword at the moment in the endurance world. And I fear a lot of people are trying to latch onto this, but actually it all kind of came from elite sport, really.
Yeah, people are kind of, it's a bit of a fad, and people kind of misunderstand the origins of the whole principle, and then they kind of get it wrong. So let's explain what 80-20 is. Basically, the 80-20 principle means that 80% of your sessions are easy and only 20% of your sessions
I thought it was the other way
hard.
around.
No, Mark, no, this is exactly where you're going wrong. Okay, so the reason is to stop the A-type person from just doing all of their sessions hard. And obviously in elite sport, that works really well, because if you're doing, say, 10 sessions a week, and you do 2 really hard sessions, then the other 8 sessions should be fairly easy. You're still going to get a massive amount of volume, but it won't all be hard, and you won't be smashing yourself. You will have time to recover between those sessions. Of course, if you're doing, let's say, 2 sessions a week, and you're only doing 80-20, that means you're only doing 1 hard session every 2.5 weeks, which, as you can see, doesn't really work so well. So you need to kind of compensate that for what you are doing in your training. If you're doing high volume, if you are training every single day, maybe even twice a day, then the 80-20 rule is probably something you should consider, and something you should definitely be looking at, as far as making sure that you're not over pushing. However, for most people, you should throw the 80-20 out of the window completely and look more objectively at how long it's going to take you to recover from your hard session. And everything should be based around that. Now, if you're doing a hard session and it's going to take you 48 hours to recover or 72 hours to recover, that's when you can fit another hard session. And everything in between that should be pretty easy or very easy even. If it's going to take you 4 days to recover, same thing. You can only do one every 4 days. It's not an 80-20 anymore. It's now based on how long it's going to take you to recover.
So in short, there are some principles we can take from the 80-20 method that are allowing the elite athletes to train and perform better, but being very specific in 80%, 20% isn't going to work for most of our
it's an understanding
athletes.
that the training effect happens not from the hard session, and therefore you need to fit exactly 20% of your training in hard. It comes from the recovery and making sure that you get the right amount of recovery before you go hard again. And for elites, that often works out as 80-20 because they're doing such big volumes that if they only do 20% of it hard, they're going to get plenty of hard work.
Yeah.
Whereas most people could...
And a lot of this research came from top-level, world-class cross-country skiers, and then they sort of found out actually this works in a lot of other sports. So just bear that in mind when you're sort of doing your maybe 7 or 8 hours of training. If you are doing that much per week, that probably doesn't apply quite as specifically to that. Right, next question from Peter Patters. How can I get enough electrolytes during and around training without buying expensive electrolyte tablets? Can I get enough through eating salty food?
Oh, salty food. Well, most active, moderately healthy people who are eating a nutrient-rich, balanced diet can actually get all the electrolytes they need simply from their food, from their diet. It's not that hard. In fact, most foods you eat actually have electrolytes in them, like bananas have potassium, etc. So you will get the things that you need. And sodium and chloride are the two most common electrolytes. Sodium chloride is your table salt, and that is everywhere. You probably are getting enough of that. But sodium and electrolyte are not the only two electrolytes you need to be thinking about. There is also potassium, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, bicarbonate. And all of these need to be included in your diet, which they are if you're eating a healthy, nutritious diet. The issue comes in when you start doing exercise and you are sweating out significant amounts of certain electrolytes, and then you need to replace them.
And also, as we have touched on many times here on the channel before, we all have different, in particular with the sodium, our sweat rates or sodium concentration. For one, I'm a very, very salty sweater. I sweat a lot, and there's a high sodium concentration in that. And therefore, I've always struggled when we're doing vigorous exercise or in hot climates. I start to cramp, I get muscle twitches quite easily. It starts to affect my performance quite quickly. So it will affect different people differently, and in which case, whilst I used to, before the electrolyte tablets were so commonly available, I used to make my own electrolyte drinks, put table salt in them, but even then I was still struggling. So the electrolyte tablets are such high sodium concentration in them, or particular brands such as Precision Fuel and Hydration make very high sodium concentration tablets, that's where they can really help. And I feel like actually it's helped certain athletes really enhance their performance as a result.
And a major advantage of those is that they also include the other electrolytes that you need with that. So you're also getting the magnesium and stuff that you also need, because it's not just sodium and chloride. The simple answer is that if you are engaging in exercise less than 60 minutes and you're not particularly hot or humid environment, yes, you're absolutely fine with your general food, drinking water only during your exercise. However, if you're going more than 60 to 90 minutes in a session, or if it's particularly hot and humid, you should definitely consider replacing those electrolytes. And the best way to do that, yes, you can make your own electrolyte replacement, but you'll probably miss one or two of the electrolytes. So your best way to do it is, I hate to say it, the expensive electrolyte tablets that you get. And they don't have to be that expensive. You can get big tubs of salt tablets that are not that expensive, and you only need one or two for a longer session to make sure your electrolyte balance is good. Because the other thing that you need to be aware of is that you can't rehydrate very well without the right electrolyte balance. Drinking just water will rehydrate you over the long course or while you're at rest, but it's not going to do that very well when you're training, because you have to get your GI tract osmolality to the same as your blood before you can absorb it. And with no salts or electrolytes in it, it's much harder for your body to absorb that fluid. So bear that in mind, and take some electrolytes.
Yeah. All right, moving on then. I think we're going to have fun chatting about this one, James. This one comes from Sebastian Schreider. He said, in the past, you answered what to do if you need to skip a session. Essentially, forget about it and move on, continue.
Accurate.
But how do you continue if the break is a little longer due to illness or injury? Let's say I miss approximately 2 weeks in a 12-week running training plan. Just skip and continuing would mean a hefty jump in the training volume intensity. How would you recommend to pick up the pace? Should I continue the training plan where I left off, and so on and so forth? I think actually, should we just jump into this kind of like run through the various different scenarios that you might find yourself in? So if you miss a day, perhaps, or a couple of days, then yeah, rather than trying to play catch up, let's just pick up the program where you left off. Otherwise, you can find yourself falling into pretty tricky territory where you're trying to cram sessions in.
Right off those sessions you missed.
If it ends up being a little bit more than maybe a few days, or you feel like you've missed some really key workouts, this is where, unfortunately, maybe a coach would come in very helpful, because rather than just missing all those few days and just picking up where you left off, they may be able to say, well, actually, you've missed this key workout, and to get the most out of your time, be efficient with the amount of time that you're spending training, we're actually going to adjust the rest of the training for the week so you're still getting the most out of it. And you may be able to figure that out yourself if you're fairly well learned or done a lot of training before. But if it's longer than that, a week or two, well, we'd actually suggest, well, you can't just continue or jump the training plan.
You can't jump straight back to where the date that the training program was, because you will, as Sebastian says, be making a massive jump in the volume that you haven't actually trained for. You can't really pick up immediately where you left off, although you probably can get there pretty quickly after a few days. The other thing is, if you say on a 12-week program, you can't ask the race organizer to shift the race 2 weeks later. I mean, it would be nice if you could, but they're probably not going to for you, which means you're in this tricky phase where you now have your race coming up and you've got 6 weeks left in your program, for example, and the race is now in 4 weeks, which is difficult. What we would suggest you do is kind of try to get back to where you were 2 weeks ago, or whatever it might be, where you dropped off as quickly as possible in 2 or 3 days, get back to that volume, and then cut out the peak weeks in your program. Now, we're not saying cut off the last 2 weeks, because those last 2 weeks are very important. They're going to taper you down for the race. So you want to cut out the peak weeks. If you cut out the last 2 weeks, you're just going to do your peak week right up into race day, which is going to be even worse. So include those last 2 weeks, cut out the 2 peak weeks, and then build up to there, and then have your normal taper. The reality is, and you probably already knew this, you just didn't want to hear it, you are not going to get to race day as fit as you were. I mean, of course, if you could take 2 weeks holiday from training and still be at the race just as fit as if you did the whole program, we'd all be on holiday all the time, wouldn't we? You wouldn't have to train. You just take 2 weeks off now and then, and you'll still be just as fit. No, the reality is you are going to lose a little bit. However, it won't be as much as you think it's going to be. And if you do get that training back on track up to that 2 weeks out, and you get a good taper and recovery in before race day, you will still have a very successful race, maybe 1 or 2% lost through that illness earlier on in the program.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's circumstance is different. It depends what you were off for, illness, injury. I would always say, for most people, if they're having to take significant amount of time off, try and look for the opportunities there. Are there things that you can still do whilst you can't necessarily run that are actually still going to benefit you? Maybe it's that core work that you always said you were going to do, but you never could find time. Let's do it. And you might actually see some benefits from it. So I always try and look for the blessings in disguises in these situations. And actually, maybe you are constantly overreaching, and maybe this 1 or 2 weeks off was what your body's been asking for a long time. And actually, maybe you will feel better as a result. So try and look for the positives in the situation.
I feel a little judged with Mark's core comment there. Okay, moving quickly on with Amjad Hussain. He says, what are good benchmark tests to tell you're ready to complete in the 70.3, say 1 month to go? I recently had a back injury and COVID, and interested in what indicators I could use at key points in my remaining 2.5 months to tell me I'm ready. Okay, this is a tricky one.
It is, yeah.
It really depends on your position on testing your fitness. Some people love doing fitness tests, and they do them every few weeks, and they always know exactly where they are, and they love it. Other people, not so much. And it is a double-edged sword. It's great when you do a fitness test and it shows that in the last month you have added so much fitness and you're doing so much better than you were a month ago. However, you can work really hard for a month, do a fitness test, and for whatever reason, it may just be that you never good night's sleep the night before, you don't see those gains in that particular test. And doesn't necessarily mean you haven't got fitter, but psychologically that can be a massive blow. And you have to really trade off whether you want that information and whether you can handle, if it's not what you want to hear, if it's still, you can still push through and get to your race ready and confident. Because if you can't, you're probably better off just using the race day as the fitness test. That is essentially what the race day is. That's when you find out whether you're ready to do a 70.3. When you line up on the start line with all those other people and aid stations and a good taper, and then you find out whether you're capable of it. If you know you can do it 2.5 months earlier because you did a fitness test, there's not that much challenge in actually doing it, is there?
Well, yeah, you say about the taper and something like the tests that you do won't have a taper. You can't afford to have a taper just to do some tests to check whether you're in form or ready to do it. Otherwise, you're just throwing away your chances for the actual race day. So you are going to be going into those tests fatigued. They're not going to feel quite as you would hope, really. The paces will feel harder than you were hoping, and you may start to have these doubts going through your mind. So, as James says, bear that in mind. If you do really want to, and you feel like...
Having said all that.
Yeah, if you've having said all that...
We do understand how much you've invested in this, and that you do want to know that you can actually do it before the start of the race day. So,
Yeah, so you could, for instance, on the swim, just go and simply swim the full distance and have that ticked off in your mind.
Even in the pool.
And you don't even necessarily need to worry about the pace. Just cover the distance. Cool, that's good. I actually can do that, and that's not an issue on race day. I'll get round.
Yeah, and then on the bike, same. Bike the full distance. Bike the full 90 kilometers. Not at race pace, maybe 10 to 15% slower than you're hoping to do on race day. Use your race nutrition. It's a good time to test it. And even do a small 3-4 kilometer brick run off it, just to get a feel for what that's going to feel like on race day. Obviously, it won't be at the same intensity you're going to do on race day, but you also won't be tapered. So if you can get around that, it might be a strain, but it'll boost your confidence when you get through the full 90 kilometers. So find some time in your program to fit in one big day where you actually do the full distance.
Yeah, and similarly for the running, try and get that up to a distance for 70.3, up to something like an 18 to 20 kilometers. Again, at a nice easy pace, and hopefully finishing that feeling strong and comfortable.
And we should say, these don't have to be on the same day or even consecutive days. These can be completely separate. They can be a week apart where you do the swim and then a week later do the bike and a week later do the run. You will be able to put them all together on race day. So if you can do all of these individually, you will be able to put them together on race day when it comes to a taper with aid stations and everything else. So if you do need that confidence boost, that's how you do it. But trust us, you'll be okay. You don't need the fitness tests leading up to it.
Well, best of luck with all your training. Keep the questions coming in using the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. Thanks again for all of them. See you next time.